Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. I am Amani Jamal. I am the Dean of the school, and I am so happy to see you all here for the Dean's Leadership Series. We talk often at Princeton SPIA about convening the brightest minds in policy for the greatest good in the world. That approach is not limited to the students who articulate here, the faculty members who teach here, and the scholars who conduct research here. We are equally intentional about welcoming to the school guest speakers who are bright minds in their own right, people whose wide-ranging backgrounds model for all of us the drive to produce the greatest good. Our guest today has spent more than 4 decades traveling the world on just such a mission. Linda Thomas-Greenfield served as the United States Ambassador to the United Nations and as the U.S. Representative to the United Nations Security Council from 2021 to 2025. During this time, Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield was a member of President Biden's cabinet and sat on the National Security Council. Prior to this, she headed the State Department's transition team for the Biden administration. As a career diplomat, Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield held a wide range of posts, including Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Director General of the Foreign Service, Director of Human Resources for the State Department, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of African Affairs, and Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. Her notable foreign service roles include Ambassador to Liberia and postings in Switzerland, Pakistan, Kenya, Gambia, Nigeria, and Jamaica. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield also led the Africa practice at Albright Stonebridge Group and was a distinguished resident fellow in African Studies at Georgetown University's Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. A few brief reminders before we begin. Please listen respectfully and with an open mind. Remain calm and curious, and if you're inclined to engage with our speakers, please ask questions and don't give speeches. Challenge ideas and not people, and allow space for other voices. Thank you to Linda Thomas-Greenfield for joining us, and to everyone in attendance for today's event, which is made possible by the Joseph S. Nye 1958 International Affairs Lecture Fund. Thanks as well to our very own Zach Burton, director of our SPIA DC Center, who worked for the ambassador twice at the State Department and at the United Nations, and who is serving as moderator this afternoon. Zach, the floor is yours. Please join us, Ambassador. I'm going to the floor.
Thank you, Amani. I can say I'm very delighted to have a close friend and former boss here, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. She's actually just flown in from Dubai by way of Davos, by way of lots of other places, which is the norm for her, kind of an Energizer bunny. So really grateful that she could join us here today, and to all of you. Linda, I will say our students are very often interested in speakers' thoughts on the policy challenges of the day, whether that's China or Venezuela or the fair market value of Greenland, and we'll get to all that. But they're also interested in how they get from their seats out here and online to your seat. As a policymaker, a diplomat, a veteran who's spent time around the world talking to presidents and prime ministers and foreign ministers, they're also curious to hear a little bit about your personal story. And I want to tell you that despite Linda's very long and impressive CV, that's in fact not why I asked her here today, but more because I think she's a model leader, somebody that is funny and kind and warm and truly takes care of her people. And you will know, for any of you that spent time in Washington, that she is revered in the Washington kind of foreign policy community for that reason. So I'm going to start there with you. You, like me, are very much a product of place, of a small town. I know that shaped you in a big way. So tell us a little bit about where you're from. Baker, Louisiana, population 12,000 or so?
Yeah, it used to be 14, and then I left and everybody followed me.
Tell us about Baker and what it was like growing up there.
You know, I grew up in a small town. It was segregated because I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I went to a segregated high school, passing to very well-equipped white schools and bused to the Black school. And that school for me was a lifeline because we had amazing teachers who wanted to see us succeed. And they lived in our community, they knew our parents, and our parents knew them. And they had authority from our parents to discipline us and to really ensure that we succeeded. When I was 12 years old, Peace Corps came to our community. There was an old historical Black college. It was a religious school, Leland College, that was in my community. I'd gone there as a first and second grader. And they brought Peace Corps when this college closed in the 1960s to train African students or to train Peace Corps volunteers who were going to Africa. And they brought African teachers to teach them the language. And we had the opportunity to meet African students who came from Swaziland and Somalia. And as an 8th grader, I learned to speak Siswati. I don't remember a word now, but I was pretty fluent as an 8th grader. But those Peace Corps volunteers also brought a sense of the world to this little community. I'd never maybe gone to Baton Rouge a few times, which was only 4 miles down the road, and visited my grandmother and 90 miles away in a car. But in those days, you didn't stop along the road. You went straight to where you were going and you came straight back home. But I'd never seen the world outside my community. And those Peace Corps volunteers had a tremendous impact on me. I didn't realize it until much later when people said, "How did you become interested in Africa?" And I had to kind of think about it. And that was where it started. In this small town. My parents were uneducated. I was the oldest of 8 kids. When you grow up poor, you don't think you're poor. I didn't think I was poor when I was growing up. It was only after I started meeting people who were not poor that I realized how disadvantaged I was with parents who had no education or little education and who raised 8 successful children.
What do you think that gave you, given how far you've come in your career? I mean, that place, those people, the community, the school, obviously, needless to say, many traditionally foreign policy elites don't necessarily come from small town Louisiana. So did that give you anything that you've taken with you?
It did, and it was the sense of compassion and the sense of kindness that came from my mother. And it was a sense that I didn't appreciate when I was a kid. When you're one of 8 kids and your mother decides she's going to take in the 7 kids next door whose parents died and she was cooking meals for all of us. And in my family, there was always enough food, but if you weren't there when it was served, you were out of luck. And so if you just happened to not be at home, you end up eating a mayonnaise sandwich for dinner. But as I grew up, I began to appreciate my mother's generosity. I appreciated her kindness, and that really was what contributed to my success in life, but particularly in the Foreign Service.
Well, you've jumped ahead now. You've mentioned food, and we're actually serving mayonnaise sandwiches here today. Tell us real quick, as folks here know, they've heard this phrase, Gumbo Diplomacy, another Louisiana origin. What is Gumbo Diplomacy?
I was talking about that today, and it's everything everybody knows. It's jollof rice diplomacy. It's curry diplomacy. It's about using food as a way of bringing people together. And for me, the gumbo was, as a Louisiana dish, was one way of doing it because you couldn't have a chef cook your gumbo. You had to do it yourself. And when I would invite people to my residence and they knew that I cooked the dish myself, and it's not an easy dish to cook, they appreciated me a little bit more than they might have appreciated the invitation with my chef cooking. And it allowed people to find some commonality around the table before you got into the complicated discussions. And if you're eating a wonderful bowl of hot gumbo, which is a soup, you're not going to get mad at the chef when she raises a difficult issue or a difficult subject. You're going to listen. And it provided people a way of listening. I don't know when I came up with the idea of gumbo diplomacy. I thought I stole it from someone, but when I started using it, I called the person that I thought I stole it from, and she's like, "You didn't get it from me." So maybe it came from me. But the true fact is, the dish that I cook better than gumbo is red beans and rice. But red bean and rice diplomacy doesn't sound so good. So
I've seen you cook this at the American Ambassador's residence in New York, fed to prime ministers and foreign ministers and Security Council ambassadors, more than a few of whom had no idea what gumbo was. Yeah. So let's fast forward quite a bit to that time in New York, 2021. You get a call from President-elect Biden to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. 2020, excuse me. I remember when we arrived, you did a fair amount of international diplomacy via Zoom. This was the height of COVID. You did a fair amount on WhatsApp. You negotiated a majority vote in the General Assembly condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine during that period. You led quite a few overseas visits on behalf of the president as head of the U.S. delegation to many places around the world. Of your time there, what was the most eye-opening aspect of your tenure? What did you not expect?
That's a big question, because I could come up with a dozen answers. But for me, what I didn't expect was the warm welcome that I received. As a person, because I'd been doing this at that point for 35 years, and so people knew me, but also the welcome that we received from that our country received from going back, because we had ceded our seat at the table in New York during the first Trump administration. And there was not as much engagement. And so we were welcomed back with warm hospitality across the board, even though we were meeting people virtually. We were meeting them on Zoom, which I didn't like initially. And I have to admit, looking back at that time, once we got in person on the floor of the Security Council and we're sitting in this circle, we're not looking at each other's faces. You might be able to see across the room expressions. But when we were on that screen, there were 15 faces, and you saw every expression that people made. You got to kind of see what they were thinking. And I remember at one point, as I first started, someone in the room said something funny to me when my speaker was on mute, and I laughed. And I got a note very quickly from another colleague who was just like, "Don't ever laugh on the screen." Like, we were having a serious discussion and you smiled. And so I kind of learned how to carry myself on that screen, because it was always on you. And even when we're sitting in the council, you don't realize that there's a camera in the room that is constantly looking at you. So you have to have a poker face 99% of the time. And that was very, very hard for me. But I still appreciated the fact that people wanted us there.
One of the faces on that screen was the Chinese ambassador to the UN, who we end up spending quite a lot of time with in those years. So let's start with China. I think it's fair to say you had dealt with China in different kind of contexts in your career, especially during your time as Assistant Secretary of Africa. The Chinese obviously had a big and emerging footprint on the continent, but when you arrived in New York, this was now very different. You were dealing with China across the board, whether it was Ukraine and nuclear issues vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, whether it was Ethiopia or Myanmar, across the board, very intensive kind of diplomacy at a moment that the dialogue between the United States and China was very limited, very limited. So a lot of
And
the,
tense.
yes, and so a lot of the bilateral conversation, I think, also happened in that context. But tell us about that and negotiating with China in and around the UN and the Security Council.
No, my approach to negotiation is respect. So even when you disagree with someone, you have to give them the respect of listening to them. But you also have to make sure that they understand who you are and where you're coming from. And I thought with the Chinese, as difficult as the relationship was, that we were able to develop a relationship of respect. And you were part of that, Zach, because that was your portfolio, and you ensured that the engagement continued. We had dinners with the Chinese, kind of where they invited us, and then we would host them, where we could have these very serious discussions. But I remember with one discussion, the Chinese ambassador said to me, "I heard what you said in DC," because I had a hearing, right? So it was open to the world. "I heard what you said," in a very kind of menacing way. And I said to him, "I'm happy you heard what I had to say. I don't get the privilege of hearing what you have to say. So that's one up that you have on me. You know where I'm coming from. You know what I'm thinking. You know what my guidance and my instruction is, because it's all in public. So I don't get that from you." And he kind of smiled and laughed. One other time, and I don't even know if you were aware of this, we were having a meeting on Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians had really been against us holding this meeting and had worked the whole Security Council to keep us from having.
This is in the middle of the civil war in Ethiopia.
Yes. And so we invited the head of OCHA to speak. And we're on screen. This is all virtual. And he describes a horrific rape of a woman who was pregnant, had her baby in the bush, watched her husband killed, and then was gang raped. And again, you got those 15 faces on the screen. 5 of us were women. I could see the horror on all 4 of the other women on the screen. I could see their disgust. And the 10 men were sitting there, not an expression on their faces. And I kept waiting for at least one of them to show some expression of sympathy. And he didn't. No, none of them did. And I melted down on the screen. I don't know if you recall that. And just complete, total meltdown. Like, what kind of people are you? You just hear about this horrific rape of a woman who watches her husband killed. And I kind of went through the whole thing, and I was really mad. And I rarely get mad. And for people who rarely get mad, you can't control yourself when you get mad. And so my hands were trembling, my voice was shaking. And the Chinese ambassador at the end of it said, "After that emotional response by the American ambassador," so I wanted to jump through the screen at that point and choke him. And that's the other advantage of meeting on screen. You can't jump and choke someone. But it got me a tremendous amount of goodwill from the humanitarian community, where I was known and where I was respected. And lots of notes like, we so appreciate, 1, you hosting the meeting, but 2, your response was right on the mark. In the meantime, I was like, I just went overboard. I should not have done that. You know, 1 million people around the world was watching that. But that's when they got to know who the American ambassador was, that I was somebody who cared.
Thanks. I'm going to jump around the world a bit to the kind of issues in the headlines. So Venezuela, some obviously are supportive of this. Some hear echoes of disastrous American interventions past. We've heard President Trump talk about this Monroe-like doctrine, the idea of a sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere, and thereby also there's been implications or suggestions of its implications for Taiwan. What are your thoughts on this? I know you just came from Davos, and this was one of the issues being discussed in the corridors there.
Yeah, I was very thankful I'm not sitting in the Security Council when this happened. The decision of the administration to go into Venezuela broke all the rules of international law. It crossed all the boundaries. Now, a lot of people are mixed on this because it was Maduro. Who cares about Maduro? So it's hard to be critical of the administration when Maduro is someone who people all despise. But countries were thinking, oh my God, if he can do this to Venezuela, Cuba could be next. He's talking about Colombia. Could Colombia be next? Could Panama be next? Could Greenland be next? And by the way, Panama is on the Security Council. Denmark's on the Security Council. So to have to defend this, I think is hard. Does anybody, again, support Maduro? No. Even both the Biden and the Obama administration had already put him on a sanctions list. So people have mixed views. Ask the people of Guyana, for example. Venezuela had already threatened Guyana's territorial integrity. So the Guyanese, saying a whole lot, but it was like, thank God they got rid of the guy. Others in the region who were were victims of the drug trade. Thank goodness they got rid of the guy. So again, mixed views on this, but the approach was not an approach that made the U.S. any safer, and it certainly has caused us to lose again a level of respect that we have internationally, because rule of law has always been the motto, and admittedly, we don't always stand by that, but this was one that went too far. And then you look at how the Russians invaded Ukraine, and then you start to think about, what about China and Taiwan? Does this give the Chinese a wink and a nod to move on Taiwan? There are others who don't think the Chinese would ever do it, but we also have seen what the Chinese have done over the past decade, putting more and more pressure on Taiwan. So I do worry that this might be a signal to China that they could take action if they wanted to.
So this move was, for whatever you're thinking about it, consistent with the Trump administration's national security strategy, which we saw some very real differences from national security strategies past. I think some things to consider there, some things that gave people a lot of concern. One of those was this kind of withdrawal, the idea of spheres of influence and withdrawing to the Western Hemisphere, but also withdrawal from other places. We talked this morning about withdrawal from UN institutions, but you also know that there was some recent news coming out of your former bureau, the Africa Bureau at the State Department, about suggesting, look, Africa is not
important.
Africa is not a priority. It's not important. It's peripheral. We should focus our attention elsewhere. What do you think about this kind of stepping back more generally in American foreign policy?
We're a superpower, and superpowers don't step back. You project. And if you're a superpower, you don't have to project with aggression. You don't have to be a bully. People respect you because of your power, and they respect you even more if you limit your use of your power. And so we have been able to develop alliances and relationships and friendships that have allowed the United States and the world to be safer. What we're doing now doesn't make the US safer, and it's not making the world safer. And, I worry as we pulled out 60 UN institutions. We are no longer keeping up with our dues at the UN. The Secretary General, I think last week, announced that the UN was in crisis. And he wasn't sure they were going to be able to continue to keep the lights on. And all of that has happened in the last 1 year. In the last year, where the world is no longer as safe as it was. And we always had conflict, we always had issues, we always had differences. But What we're experiencing now is, for me and many people, not just Democrats, Republicans as well, it's scary.
We've talked a little bit about the Security Council. I want to ask you about another important table around which you sat, the National Security Council. For those of you who don't know, the U.S. ambassador kind of has two jobs, two full-time jobs as a cabinet member. She's first representing the United States in New York, but also sitting regularly for all of the policy discussions in Washington as part of the National Security Council cabinet. So tell us about that. Tell us about those deliberations during the Biden administration, but also in particular, I know there were times when you disagreed with the policy, when you dissented, and what that looked like.
Wow, you're going to put me on the spot. You know, being a member of the president's cabinet is a huge, huge honor. And when I think about where I came from, I have this book that I keep thinking I'm going to actually sit down and write. And the basis of the book is the first chapter of your life doesn't define what subsequent chapters would be. Nobody would have expected a girl from a poor family in the South to end up on the president's cabinet. So it was a huge deal for me and for many people who look like me. But I felt sitting there, I had a responsibility to be true to who I was, but also to be a genuine advisor to the president. So our cabinet meetings weren't publicized. The press would come in at the beginning, the president would make a statement, and the press would leave. So we had really intense and sometimes contentious discussions and negotiations. Ultimately, decisions would be made by the president, but he allowed for there to be different views expressed in the room. There was never like the cabinet meetings I see now on TV where every single person starts with telling the president how wonderful he is. Sort of similar to DPRK when the president walks into the room, everybody starts clapping and they're like on automatic pilot clapping. Those cabinet meetings were not like that. And, you know, sometimes you'd walk out of a cabinet meeting, you're not sure one of your colleagues would speak to you again because they were that sometimes contentious. And I felt, again, that I had a responsibility to do that. Sometimes I was in accord with everybody, and other times I was not. And several times I actually put my position in writing to the president, because sometimes you want to make sure there's a record that you had different views. I think I was respected for that, both inside the cabinet as well as outside the cabinet. And sometimes people would leak you know, what was being done there. And I didn't want that to happen. I wanted, I felt that having a seat at the table was more important than not being at the table. And some people said, well, when you disagreed, why didn't you just quit? Well, that's not what you do. Quitting is not an option when you're trying to make a difference. And you have to accept sometimes you're going to win and other times you're going to lose. And I lost a lot, actually. But when I won, when I was on the winning team, it was really a tremendous reward for me. And I wouldn't give up that opportunity if I had it again.
You mentioned what that meant to be on a cabinet in the National Security Council for somebody that looked like you and for young people that look like you. And I know this morning when you were speaking with a class, someone asked about diversity and about DEI and how that's come under fire in recent years in public institutions and private institutions. And can I ask you you mentioned a story how this impacted you starting in Rwanda, and I thought that was really compelling. If you could share that again.
Well, first of all, I find it so despicable that the word diversity is a bad word. It's in the dictionary, and there are a lot of bad words in the dictionary, but to make it such a bad word that people can't even use it for me, is very, very painful. Diversity does not mean you're bringing in people who are less qualified. Diversity means you're bringing in people who are different. So there is a kind of a level of equality that's there. And that equality sometimes meant that people who were different didn't move forward. Programs of diversity allowed those people equally qualified to move forward. And I became so engaged on this after my own experience in Rwanda. I was serving in Kenya as the regional refugee coordinator, and I went to Rwanda to review our programs for Burundi refugees in Rwanda.
This is 1994.
1994, was it? Yeah.
April 1994.
April, was it? Yeah, it was April 1994. And I arrived there on, I think, whatever the Monday was, April 3rd or April 4th. Had a full day of meetings, but I started to pick up on the tensions in the country. And on April 6th, I was in a meeting with UNHCR and CARE and ICRC, and we heard a big, loud kaboom, and it was the president's plane being shot down as he came into the airport. And both the president of Rwanda and the president of Burundi were killed that day. Within 24 hours, the country the genocide started. It started within hours of the plane being shot down. And the next morning, I'm in the house of our deputy chief of mission. We hear that they have a hit list of people they're going to kill. And included on that hit list was the acting prime minister of the country, who happened to be a Hutu, a moderate Hutu, who was brought into the government, and she lived right next door. And she called to ask if she could come in to the residence. And we made the right decision that we were going to do everything possible to bring her in, assuming that our residence was protected by diplomatic immunity. But uneducated soldiers with guns don't know about diplomatic immunity, and they don't know what diplomats look like, other than if you're American, you're white. And so they tried to get this woman, and they didn't get her. We tried to help her. Some people on the road saw us at the wall, trying to help her get across the wall. And the soldiers, 25, I don't know more, came thundering into the residence. And when they walked in the door, I saw immediately what they saw on their faces. They saw me and they saw her. It didn't even occur to them that this Black woman in this house was an American diplomat. They saw her, and I had a gun in my face for probably, I don't know, it probably was only a few seconds, but it seemed like an eternity to me. I saw the guy's hand on the trigger, and at the time we got up that morning, I decided I might have to run that day. And so I put on some 5-pocket jeans that I can't even get up over my knees now, but I kept them. And I put in those jeans 5 things. I put my passport, I put my embassy ID card from Nairobi, I put a credit card, I put US dollars, 300 US dollars that I'd changed over, and then I put some Rwandan currency, and I put them all in each pocket. And I'm like, one of these things might save me if I have to run. Well, I didn't have to run. I'm there, I pull out my passport, and I start to attack this guy with my passport. Because, like I said, I saw on his face that he didn't see an American diplomat. He saw a Rwandan on his hit list. And so with my passport, and he didn't understand anything I was saying. I was screaming in French, I'm an American, I'm not the person you're looking for. And I could see no recognition on his face. And I then remembered that I knew a little bit of Kiswahili, Nina Taka Kenya. I know how to say, I live in Nairobi, I have 2 children, my name is Linda, the simple stuff you learn when you first start to take a language. And so I spit out all of that. Kenya Rwandese is very close to Kiswahili, but I could still see he didn't understand what I was saying. And so I just thought, I'm about to get killed. I need to die speaking my own language. And so I started speaking to him in English. And just at that moment, another guy comes in, grabs my passport from my hand. He looks at the passport, and then he moves the gun out of my face. And I realized then that it was important for the world to know that American diplomats are not just white, that we come in all colors. We come from all backgrounds. We come from sometimes, I'm sure there's a Rwandan American who's in our diplomatic service. And so diversity means making sure that we reflect the reality of what our country is. That country is not a country that's homogenous. It's a country that is a patchwork quilt. And so as we deal with the attack on diversity, we have to stand up and we have to continue to ensure that these are things that we value. It's not just something that we do because it's a good thing to do. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And so I'll keep standing up for diversity, and I hope you all stand up for diversity. This room is extraordinarily diverse, and every one of you should be in Foreign Service of the United States to reflect the values that you learn at this great university, but also to show the world who we are as a.
I'm going to get to audience questions here shortly. I've got just one left, which I'm going to ask in Swahili, and if you could answer in Swahili, that'd be great.
In Siswati.
Okay. One question, sort of picking up where you left off there, you also served as Director General of the U.S. Foreign Service in charge of our personnel. And so there obviously have been major cuts to public service institutions, not just the State Department, but across the board. And this school is about public service, about public institutions, about training the next sort of cadres of professional public servants. And a lot of our students, of course, have real questions right now about that career path and what that looks like and doubts. And what can you say to them about the value of public service or how you see it at this moment?
I think it is so important that you continue to pursue your goals to be in the public service in whatever capacity that you're looking at. We need you. We need the skills that you're learning from this university, the values that you bring from wherever you came from, and the diversity that will give to our representation. And whether you agree with the Trump administration, if you do, then jump on it. Go in and join them. Because I think having studied it, you're going to go in there with some values that will cause people to stop and pause. Like, is it right thing to hack refugee communities? People who've actually been approved for refugees. Question, you can go in and make your voice heard. And I said today, it could get you fired, but it may not. It may get you heard. So
we lost your mic there.
So I do encourage you to continue to pursue those goals. And if you're not comfortable going into this administration, these things change. They change all the time. I did it for 40 years. I came into the government under President Reagan. And I actually talked about quitting because I lived and worked in Liberia, and the president was going to meet with Samuel Doe, who he calls Sergeant Mo. And I'm like, our president is going to meet with this man with blood under his fingernails. I don't want to work for this government. And someone kind of slapped me into reality and said, Linda, if you quit, nobody cares. You're going to make a career where you will make a difference. And every single time I do something where I feel I made a difference, I remember that person telling me not to quit, to stick it out. And I say that to Foreign Service officers who have survived career civil service who are still in, stick it out because we need you. And continue your goals, pursuing your desires to work in the public service because we're going to need you.
Thanks. I'd like to open it up to questions. As always, we'll give priority to students. We've got some microphones coming around. Please, if you would, just tell us your name and who you are and maybe what you're studying if you're indeed a student. Microphone here. We'll go here next.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Ambassador, for taking the time to come and speak with us. You've also been a champion of civil society in much of the work that you've done. I'm wondering, so during your time at the Security Council, you also led the charge on Security Council reform from the US position. To what extent do you see that body kind of having the ability to reform and its utility in the current day, especially when we're seeing kind of other options, I'll say, being put out there with the Board of Peace, et cetera, that don't hold the values of the Security Council?
Well, let me start by saying two things. First, the issue of reform has been there for a very long time. We talk about it. We talked about it. We actually even put some proposals on the table, but we were never able to move it forward. The second thing I will say, which will shock all of you, as much as I disagree with the approach that the administration has taken in dealing with the UN, blow it all up, it's forced the UN and member states to take more seriously the reform that's needed. And it doesn't mean throwing out the whole institution, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It means taking serious decisions to figure out how do you reform this very bloated system. There's so much duplication. There is just too many people doing the same things. And nobody has ever wanted to take the decision to actually say, we don't need 60 UN agencies all doing the same thing. I mean, just look at the main ones. Look at UNHCR, UNICEF, WFP. All of them do the same things. WFP has a responsibility for food. Let's let WFP do food. UNICEF, education and children, let them do it. UNHCR, refugees. But they all do each other's jobs. And so I think we're going to see serious reform coming in the future. I don't want to see the UN demolished like USAID because we need the UN. And I quote Madeleine Albright all the time, who said, if we didn't have it, we'd create it. We just now have to recreate the UN. We have to recreate it, taking into account the environment we live in today, where we have 193 countries, not 40 or 50 that we had when the UN was created 80 years ago.
Right here.
Thank you so much for asking. This is the first time I've ever been asked this question, but I think this is one of the most important questions. And I don't know that I have the answer, but I do know that we have to continue to support the sciences. We have to continue to support the realities of what is happening to our environment. Climate change is real. 17 inches of snow in North Carolina. My husband grew up there. They've never seen that before. So we have to continue our work to deal with the scientific research and information that's helping us to address all of these issues. We can't be in a situation where we're even questioning the importance of immunizations and cancer research. All of these are important. We're losing a lot of the scientific creativity in the United States because many of the experts were immigrants, and they came here to study because we were a welcoming environment for researchers to come here, and we benefited from that research. I'm told that many of those researchers are now going back to their homes. They're going back to China, they're going back to India, they're going back to Europe, where they are welcome. And we're going to lose the benefits of their creativity, their ingenuity, their research. So again, I'm delighted that you asked that question. I'm delighted to hear you're a scientist in this room. And we are going to need you more now than we've ever needed you before because we're going backward.
Couple more questions. Let's go right here. We've got about 6 minutes left.
I'll try to make my answers shorter.
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Selma. I'm a sophomore who's going to declare SPIA hopefully in a few days. And I just wanted to ask you if you can explain to me your reasoning behind the difference in the United States condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but its refusal of the condemnation of Israel's killing of civilians over and over, and the vetoing of 3 different resolutions, even after the ICJ ruling that Israel has been committing war crimes. We still vetoed those resolutions. So I wondered if you could explain that logic.
I don't know if I can explain the logic, but I can explain that U.S. policy has not changed. This was not a new policy under the Biden administration. It has always been a policy of this administration to support Israel. I will say to you that there was not unified support in the administration for that policy. And the veto was not, and one of the things that really annoys me is that people see the veto as my veto. It was a US government veto. And if I hadn't been sitting there, somebody else would have sat there and done the veto. So my not sitting there wouldn't have stopped it, but my sitting there made a huge effort toward finding a path that would not have put me in the position of being the face of the first veto for the U.S. During the Biden administration. But our policy didn't change. It didn't change under Biden. It's the same policy that we have supported for generations and generations. The attack on October 7th really sent shockwaves. And I did say to the Brazilians who put forward that resolution on October 18th that it was too soon to put that resolution forward. It was just 2 weeks after the October 7th attack, and that we needed more time to come up with a path that would allow us to have a resolution that everyone would support. And unfortunately, we didn't get there. But it was not through lack of negotiations on my part, on the part of my staff, and also on the part of other members of the president's national security advisors. But the result is what you saw, and it's something that, again, I think we all will have to live with for our entire lives.
Let's go up here.
Thank you, Ambassador, for taking the time. You spoke about your humble beginnings, and I'm curious if you could reflect more on your leadership growth and trajectory. What were some of the resources you used to learn about what it meant to serve at the highest levels of government? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. I had amazing mentors throughout my career, and I always like to mention Ambassador Ed Perkins. He has a book, Mr. Ambassador, if anybody wants to read about him. He was the first African-American ambassador to serve in South Africa. He was Director General of the Foreign Service. I was his staff assistant and eventually became Director General. He was ambassador to Liberia, and he was UN ambassador. So he really played a significant, and he was from Louisiana. So he played a significant role in my life. But there were others, Madeleine Albright, Secretary Rice, so many others who really I watched and looked at how they led and learned from them. And I think my most important lessons, though, were learned from people who were bad leaders, because you learn from bad leaders what you don't want to do. You see the consequences of their bad leadership. You see the consequences of their bad decisions. So these people who will not be mentioned by name taught me the most about leadership and how to be an effective leader. And I had some leadership principles I used to keep on the board. Tamara, who's here, who worked for me when I was Assistant Secretary for Africa. I don't remember them all, they change every day. But the bottom of that list was kindness and compassion. And I learned from Rwanda that true leaders make decisions, and you will never, ever have all the information you need to make the best decision. If you wait for all the information, it's gonna be too late. So you have to make a decision with sometimes only half the information you need to make a good decision. But the people who work for you, the people who lead you, the people who look up to you are looking to you to lead. They're looking to you to decide. And if you're sitting around saying, can you bring me some more information? Can you give me a little more on this? And in the meantime, people are dying, they're not going to respect you in the end. So sometimes I made bad decisions because I didn't have all the information, but I made timely decisions that help people to move forward. And if you have good people working for you, like Zach and Tamara and others who work for me, David, they'll tell you sometimes, like, I don't think you want to make that decision. I think you want to rethink that. So you want to have good people working for you and working with you. And I always say that good leaders make sure they hire people who are smarter than they are. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but you have to have smart people around you who can guide you, who can instruct you, who can give you the information you need to use your leadership skills to make the right decision eventually.
And who you can tell to buzz off when they're wrong. 1 minute, very last quick question. The U.S. Ambassador to the UN is a wild job at the intersection of politics and diplomacy and culture in New York and music. And you met the craziest number of people from every walk of life. I remember we met Prince Harry and Meghan. You met the NBA commissioner. There were presidents of the world around. I mean, it's a wild job. Tell us in the last question, what was the most fun meeting or most fun moment during your tenure?
Actually, it was the meeting with Harry. So Harry sends me an email on my personal email, and it had a crown in the subject. And I didn't open that email. I was like, this is spam. I have a husband who is a computer guy. I have never opened up an email that got me in trouble. I deleted that email so quickly, and I deleted it out of my deleted file. So then he emails me on my work email. And I'm like, this is weird. I got this crown thing on my personal email, and I don't know what this is. I'm not opening it up. And I deleted it. And eventually
Playing hard to get.
Eventually his people got in touch with the office and said he wanted to meet with me. And so I met him first virtually, and I told him that I deleted all of his emails. And then he came to see me during High Level Week with Meghan. And I was just in gaga over the prince and Meghan. And I had staff all around. They were all waiting to get introduced. They were waiting for pictures. And I'm usually really good at that, like making sure my staff gets recognition. I ignored everybody in the room. And in the end, they were all standing there, and he was getting ready to leave. And I went, oh, God, yes, I have all these people who wanted to meet you, Prince Harry. And I had a chef who had read up about them and heard that Megan was vegan, and she made vegan cookies that she never made for me. She made this amazing sourdough bread with the UN emblem on it. But he was genuinely nice, and he genuinely wanted to hear my views about the humanitarian world and how he could make a difference. And I had to pinch myself every day that I was in the room with him. I was also in the room with the Prime Minister of the UK, who referred to me as Linda and said to the president, maybe you can have Linda do this. And I'm like, I've never met this man, and he's calling me Linda. So I had some extraordinary experiences meeting people from across the world, challenging the foreign minister of Russia, what's his name? Lavrov, in the Security Council. When I said something and I said, he's not listening, he's looking at his phone. And everybody laughed and he was embarrassed. But you have some amazing moments in this job. A lot of celebrities. I was in Davos and walking down the street, and there's this guy coming toward me, and he's walking fast in one direction. I'm walking fast in the other direction. I'm thinking, I met this guy somewhere before. But I kept walking, and as soon as I passed him, I realized it was John Baptiste, who is from Louisiana. I got his number in my phone, and we passed each other, and I think he thought I recognize her, but I don't know who she is. And when I passed him, I realized him, and I turned and I said, John. And he turned quickly and he kept walking. I'm like, wow. There was a day when he would have stopped to talk to me.
Maybe one day yet. Thank you, Linda, for being here. Thank you, Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield, for being here.
Thank you.